Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I just stole Tucker's intro because Tucker tried to this morning surprise me, but you can't slip one past the fucking goalpost with old Abram Buner when it comes to
Nope.
fucking Nintendo anniversaries. But I'm not going to steal your entire spotlight. Tucker, why are we here today on this fateful Saturday morning?
Well, see, this past week has been special for us. I've been a
Absolutely.
little bit sick. I just moved into a new house. It's a lot of things coalescing. But on the video game side of things, screw next gen. All right,
Fuck
PS5,
'em. Fuck 'em.
Xbox Series X, SX, whatever.
Don't even
Nintendo
want to
has
name
had
names.
anniversaries. The Wii U, the Wii, and now the DS. And I think the Super Nintendo is also today, but we're not going to talk about that.
Oh,
We can if you want to do another video, but today is the anniversary of the Nintendo DS. It is 16 years old in North America, and my very first video game system. I assume one of your first, and sort of the thing that grew me up on video games. I'm very excited to look back on this little baby boy.
yeah, I'm excited too. It wasn't my first system, it was my second actually behind my PS2, which was my
Yeah.
first. But I got my DS for Christmas one year, and I absolutely fucking adored it. The first two games I got with it, I'll always remember Lego Star Wars: The Complete Saga
Okay.
and DK King of the Swing,
Interesting.
which is a game that Tucker didn't think was real.
No,
But
yeah.
I promise you, it is real. You fucking control Donkey Kong. He moves back and forth like this, and you have to use the shoulder buttons to make him climb.
You know what it's like? The monkey section in Astrobot or in Astro's Playroom.
Astra's Playroom ripped off the DK Jungle Climber games. Oh fuck. Oh fuck.
Uh-oh. Team Asobi. Uh-oh. We got a fucking lawsuit waiting for you.
But no, I absolutely loved my DS. It's a system I have a lot of memories on. Outside of Pokemon, I think you're going to talk a lot about Pokemon, and I got some things to say about Pokemon. But my experience with the DS is a lot broader than that, and it
Yeah,
was actually more the 3DS era for me that was categorized by Pokemon than anything. I
sure.
found myself really playing a ton of different Nintendo franchises and falling into a couple niches that I want to talk about. But it's a system that's incredibly special to me for sure.
Sure, yeah. I have a weird history with the DS because it did start my video game life, essentially. Pokemon Pearl and my red Nintendo DS Lite were the first two video game things I ever officially owned myself that weren't like flash games on a computer or anything like that. And let me tell you, I have some weird memories with Pokemon Pearl because I could not figure out how to get past the second route for like months because I refused to go back and talk to my mom and tell her that I had gotten the Pokedex. And you can't keep going until you do that. So I was stuck in those first few areas for a long time, and then you do the Orberg gym, you visit Jubilife City, you do all that shit. You fucking go up to Floroma Town, you go into Valley Windworks, and Mars is there, and you gotta battle Mars and her Perugly. And I couldn't beat that goddamn Perugly for months. Let me tell you, I could not beat it. And eventually, I got traded to me a Ditto, a Kyogre, and a Breloom. All like super
Huh.
high level, way higher
Sure.
than they don't listen to me, but I just kept spamming surf, sport, fucking fighting attacks from Breloom, all that shit. And eventually I got through it and I beat the game. I don't think I beat the Elite Four in Pokemon Pro. I think one of my friends did for me. But Pokemon Pro, my first video game, my first Pokemon game, I I sucked at that game. I was so bad at that game.
Yeah, I think my first Pokemon core game was Platinum.
Mhm.
So I really enjoyed that, but I think I just beat it how every fucking dumb kid did. My Torterra was just unholy
Oh
high
yeah,
level by
Turtwig.
the time we got to the end.
Turtwig, my first Pokemon. I got some a special bond with that guy. I
But
still
actually, the
have my
Poke
Torterra. It's in my Pokemon home on my Switch.
mine's fucking far gone. I've got no idea. He's probably in a different country right now. I sold that game to GameStop when I was younger. But that actually wasn't even my first Pokemon game, and it wasn't the Pokemon game I've got the most fondness for in the DS. That's actually
Uh-oh.
Pokemon Blue Rescue Team,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
which my grandma got me because I was just like, I want Pokemon. And, you see
Close enough.
fucking, yeah, she was like, yeah, here's Pokemon. I'm like, that's all I've ever wanted. So I played a lot of that game.
Hmm.
Um, that's one of the games I've got the fondest memories with. I don't know if I want to get right into the games or talk about the system as a whole, but there were a couple of games like that, as well as things like Kirby Superstar Ultra. I played a lot of New Super Mario Brothers. There's a lot
Or
of games
yeah,
I hopped into and played pretty robustly. Phantom Hourglass. I found myself spread around and getting games from weird sources, getting them from my aunt, getting them from because she would finish them and give them to me. We'd swap games, because my aunt's
yeah,
a big gamer too. I got a lot of things for my birthday. Because keep in mind, we were young little boys during this era, so
very.
you got games how you got games.
Yeah,
I remember spending an agonizing period of time when I learned what the DSi was, waiting until Christmas when I'd finally get one.
yeah.
So there's just a lot of interesting memories I have with the system. But I wouldn't say that I'm like the Wii card in the corner. Hopefully, see my fucking Premiere gets fixed and I can actually export that video, which is very good.
Hmm.
I don't revisit the DS very often at all.
No? Okay. Interesting. I have not revisited it a lot, but I'd say on average I play and complete about 2 DS games a year. Just randomly going back to my
Interesting.
DS, pulling out something. I need to finish this. And some of them I would say are, well, some of them are 3DS games, but I'm always playing some sort of permutation of the Nintendo DS. And this year I played Professor Layton and the Miracle Mask, which we talked about before. And I guess I didn't beat any other DS games this year, but I find myself often looking at my DS case, opening it up, and seeing all these games that I've owned for a very long time that I never really finished as a child.
Sure.
So my memories with the DS are kind of spread across my entire life. Because when I was a kid, it was basically just all the Pokemon games that I had, and there were spin-offs. I had uh Pokemon, all the Pokemon Ranger games. So I had Shadows of
Bad
Malvia when I
games.
was a kid. I fucking love all 3 of those games. Although the first one's kind of crappy. Um, Pokemon Conquest, which I never beat, but it was pretty interesting. I had Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time, which was fun. Some great fucking songs in that or Explorers of Sky rather, great songs in that game. And then just piddling around in other things. New Super Mario Brothers, never beat, but played a lot of when I was a kid. Mario Kart DS, played that with friends. Professor Layton and the Curious Village, which I had as a kid, then sold, then rebought and beat last summer. And finally, the Scribblenauts series, both the
Yeah.
original and Super, 2 of my favorite games when I was a kid. I pre-ordered the first Scribblenauts game with my dad for my brother's birthday, and they gave us a Maxwell from Scribblenauts hat, the big fucking red lumps on the top, the headphones. I really wish I still had that thing because it was dumb as all hell, but the DS is a really special system to me. I own so many DSs and 3DSs. It's absolutely fucking crazy. But I'd say most of my library comes from friends leaving their games at my houses, me borrowing their games, and them not giving a shit that I still have them. People saying like, "Oh, hey, I don't want this fucking sack of old GBA and DS games that they don't give a shit about." So I've got some really weird ones I'm never gonna touch, but the DS has so many strange games on it. I think it's a really special system for a lot of reasons.
I think the DS has a great core games. A lot of the ones that you touched on, I've got a lot of memories with, Mario Kart DS and the Scribblenauts games, especially Super Scribblenauts.
Yeah.
And then everyone ended up with weird things. Like I played a lot of the My Sims on DS, which in
Okay.
retrospect is a blatant Animal Crossing ripoff.
Oh,
I never
interesting.
I never had Wild World at the time. But I find that the 3DS, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, is just a souped up DS library.
Sure. Yeah. Of course.
You miss out on some things. You're not going to get Henry Hatsworth and the Puzzling Adventure, one of the
Hmm.
fucking seminal DS games on your 3DS. But I think that evolution it was pretty cut and dry A to B.
Yeah.
And so while I have all these fond memories of what the DS was able to do, I think it got superseded by what I think is one of Nintendo's best pieces of hardware and software libraries of all time.
Mm.
So for me, the DS is more of a rear window. Oh, you know what? This is a very distinctive period in time for me, but not necessarily something I revisit. Like I want to revisit the GBA libraries or 3DS libraries, which feel I think a little bit more distinct.
Yeah, I mean, I have a Game Boy Advanced SP. I have essentially only played the Pokemon games on there. I played Fire Red, I played Ruby, and I played Emerald. But and of course, I have plenty of memories with my 3DS and the
Yeah,
3DS library. But none of these systems I've really gone back and played the other major games from that I've missed. It's really just me catching up on classics from my childhood that I never finished. So I've never played any of the I never played Wild World. I never played either Zelda games. I never played any of the other Mario spin-offs or anything like that. It really essentially was just Pokemon for me. And that's just an interesting piece of my gaming history that when I was a kid, video games, Pokemon was video games to me. It was that and Smash Brothers. And we talked about that in the Wii video is how important Brawl was to me. But all I did when I was a kid was play Pokemon. I almost have a complete Pokedex in Platinum, which I don't even know how I managed to do that as a dumb fuck kid without any guides or internet or anything. But I remember Pokemon Black and White following the names of the Pokemon as they came out in Japanese. I had this website that I would go to and I would learn all the Unova Pokemon's names in Japanese and wonder what was coming next and log in every Friday to see what would be coming up and all the new Pokemon designs. I'm like, okay, some of these aren't real, but then they turned out to be real. Yeah, I don't know. I can talk a lot about my Pokemon memories from that generation, but that's really where most of my experience lies. I would like to go back and try some of those other games, but I can't really comment too much on the library as a whole because I haven't really played a lot of them.
Yeah, and it's an interesting library for sure because it's got a pretty solid scattershot of franchises represented.
Mhm.
Even if they didn't get the most robust representation, a lot of things got hit on, even Metroid, which was very important early on with things like Hunters, which was bundled, a demo of which was bundled in with the launch DSs to prove like, hey, you know what, we can do a shooter here, we can do all kinds of things. And it's interesting to see the DS trying to prove itself in various ways.
Sure.
And I think a lot of the games that use the touch screen or its various features are what stand out the strongest in my mind. One of which is WarioWare DIY, which is an incredibly special game, and highlighted the ways that Nintendo was starting to dabble with expanding their IP beyond, this insular experience and bring it to online. We saw the Nintendo Wi-Fi be introduced
Yeah.
with Mario Kart DS, which I never really took advantage of. But something like WarioWare DIY, reading about that Nintendo Power, seeing the team have their own mini games, and then wanting to buy the game myself so I could download their content. It's interesting to see the ways that DNA from some of Nintendo's early experiments here on the DS were realized in things like Mario Maker or just
Sure.
their
Yeah.
general online presence now. So it's an interesting system to look at in that from that respect. And of course, you can't ignore how much it just absolutely trounced the competition, and how ubiquitous Nintendo was as a whole that generation between Wii and DS. And unlike one distinction that's interesting to make between the Wii and the DS is the way that the DS is able to retain both the hardcore and casual experiences where the Wii just couldn't quite hit that balance. But there really was something for every type of player on the DS, which I think is part of the reason why it was so special and why everybody wanted to have one.
Yeah, I mean, that was the system that everyone had. Regardless if you were an Xbox 360 kid or you had a Wii or you were playing Flash games on your computer, everyone had a DS. And I remember one of the weirdest memories just in general for school when I was a kid is road trips on buses to places and everyone would have their DS and PictoChat would be going fucking ham. Let me goddamn tell you, everyone on their PictoChat sending messages to each other in the back of the bus, the front of the bus, yelling across the bus. That was just, I mean, that PictoChat is an interesting part of Nintendo history that I'm glad it has some representation, and that two Smash Brothers stages. Um,
Yeah.
but it's interesting that something like that hasn't really returned, and it shows what a social experience the DS was, even if it wasn't an online focused console. Because I used most of my DS time was screwing around with friends in Pokemon battles and trying to figure out how online worked, or downloading things, which I never really did. But I remember when they announced you could get to different Rotom forms if you downloaded them from DS Wi-Fi connection, and I would sit behind the couch by the router and mash my DS and try to figure out how I to connect it, and I never was able to do it because I had no idea how the fucking internet worked when I was 8 or 9. But yeah, I mean that early days of Nintendo using the internet, it's an interesting era, and I don't really think it needs to be revisited much because it kind of was just worse than what we have today, and it wasn't anything particularly special, but it clearly was them trying, even if it wasn't the fullest extent they could have gone to.
Yeah, I like how experimental the DS feels in a lot of respects, and you got to give it credit not only for the online, but that was the first Nintendo system to have a dedicated home screen, even if you had to shut the fucking thing off every time you did anything on it, even if you just wanted to go into your settings. Um, but it's cool watching that stuff begin to take shape, and having that GBA slot prior to the DSi was very cool too. Much like how the Wii was able to expose me to the GameCube primarily. Then of course, the DS didn't have a virtual console analog or anything, but in a similar respect, I got to play a lot of GBA games and got to experience those, and even some of the cool ways you could interface those together. When you're transferring your Pokemon from Gen 3 to Gen 4, you had fucking one on the bottom, one on the top, and you had to do the catching game. I remember it being really
Yeah,
frustrating.
Pal Park.
Yeah, Pal Park. But there was a lot of cool stuff that system did. Even if it's more of a rear view thing for me, it's certainly fun to discuss and drum up all of these weird memories I have with the system, because I do have a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm currently, as I do in these videos, looking at the 3DS's library, just sort of scanning through Google, and a
Sure.
lot of these games don't have much of a place in Nintendo history anymore. Like most of them, I would say that aren't the mainline Pokemon games or a couple of the Mario games or Zelda games don't aren't talked about. Like there are so many spin-offs for all of these franchises that nobody that didn't sell great, nobody gives a shit about now. They're not referenced. Like they just really did a lot of experimental, strange stuff with this Super Princess Peach. That's something no one fucking talks about. I didn't even know that existed until a couple years ago, and I
It's not
saw
very good.
I saw my friend's sister playing it on her DS. I'm like, what? This exists? There's a lot of those. Even as someone who was into Nintendo as a kid, that none of my friends had because they just were so strange that they kind of even passed by the children. So I don't know, but I think that's a fun idea to sort of find like I can dig through a library and find stuff that I've never heard of.
Yeah, and I played again, as we mentioned in the Wii video. I had GameFly during this time, so I played a lot of shit from this library. There's very few Nintendo games I missed on the DS, which is cool to think about these games that are so foreign to you but very familiar to me. Reading about them in my Nintendo Power, I'm like, you know what I want? I want that game, and it would show up in the mail. It'd be something, it was strange and forgettable, but I've got memories with it. Um, and then it's just weird to see which ones end up sticking with me. I really think that Kirby, what is it? Kirby Superstar Ultra remains, I think, probably the pinnacle of its series. So it's weird to see. It's weird to see which franchises peaked where, and which did get forgotten about. But a lot of what the DS did, I think has been superseded. Or you look at the Zelda games which you haven't played, which are fun. And I've got a personal connection to something like Phantom Hourglass, but they didn't connect to a lot of people in the ways that other games did. They felt a little bit too strange with the touch screen and all. Um, so I don't know. I don't know. It'd be fun to just get a fucking laundry list of games and look at where they are in comparison to their series now and such. But I don't know. The DS is the DS. It's fine. It's totally fine.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, looking at this library, a lot of the ones that are even from the big franchise, as they're saying, didn't really hit home. Oh, my dad's calling me, but we're gonna not answer that right now. Um, oh crap, I can't remember where I was going. But I mean, like a lot of these, looking back, I don't even know how much I would be interested in checking them out as a modern day gamer because a lot of them just seem ancillary to the series, and because of their sort of obscure and forgettable nature because they're so experimental. It I don't know. A lot of them I might want to check out, but even things like the DS Zelda games, those get passed up in almost every Zelda conversation.
Well, yes, because it's also important to remember that I think a lot of the DS's library is iterative opposed to being incredibly experimental. You look at New Super Mario Brothers DS, you look at Mario Kart DS, you look at a lot of things, even Pokemon, very iterative. A lot of this stuff just kind of continued on. So I think the DS has almost a strange identity crisis, depending on how you want to look at it through. Is it this more casual system? Is it the brain age system? Because in that respect is very iconic, but in the larger Nintendo tapestry of franchises and such, I find myself struggling to really come up with a lot of games that I want to go back to, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have many that I revisit. The Professor Layton games I still think are just as good as they were when they came out. I think Scribblenauts honestly probably had its peak back then. The ones since kind of have sort of started becoming a little more shaky. But you get those more original DS franchises, the Cooking Mama, the Professor Layton, the Phoenix Wright, the Scribblenauts, all of those I think have their own place in Nintendo history, and in some ways feel more at home on that system because they were explicitly designed with that hardware in mind, as opposed to just being a franchise that was shifted on to the DS. And I think that those are pretty cool. One that particularly connects with me is Monster Tale. One of my first Metroidvania games, but one I think is still very solid today in a lot of regards, and it uses the dual screen functionality of the DS in such a unique way, and it feels so natural to be able to balance gameplay and sort of pet simulator on the bottom in one game, and it combines into something that's really special and a series that I would like to see revisited. It's fucking not going to happen, but a really good game that I don't see a lot of people talk about, but that's a special one for me.
I think the bottom line is I just don't care about this generation that
Interesting.
much. I mean, I grew up with it, sure, but nostalgia is fine, I guess. I suppose maybe in a couple more years, maybe I'll feel nostalgic to go back to these things, but it seems disinteresting, you know. Perhaps because I experienced so much of it's a little bit more trodden over. But outside of the actual hardware gimmick, okay. I feel like Nintendo's focus really was on the Wii, and I think the Wii is where the more interesting
Yeah,
ideas lie.
sure.
The DS
And
caught
even
fire.
that you're not particularly
No,
reminiscent.
I'm not, but I think there's more interesting things to discuss there. The
Sure.
DS caught fire. The dual screens is a pretty. It was a bizarre concept at the time, but in practice, it worked very well.
Hmm.
And then it was let's rely on the pillars. Let's hit the casual pillars with our brain ages, our iterative, our Nintendogs, and we're gonna hit our cooking mamas, our
Hmm.
Laytons, and everything. And then, Nintendo will show up as they feel the need to. But do I really care about Yoshi's Topsy. No, Yoshi's Topsy Turvy is a cool game on the GBA. It's touch
Yeah.
and go. That's the boring one. Yoshi's Island DS, Metroid Prime Hunters. There's almost a feeling that the DS fell into something similar to the PS Vita, where they were trying to bring these console experiences to the handheld, and they
Mm.
never could quite do it.
Yeah.
I think both the GBA and the 3DS carved out more unique identities for themselves because you got to look back at the DS's launch library. It was the big hitters from Nintendo were Super Mario 64 DS and a demo of Metroid Prime Hunters, which was them saying, hey, look, this is what we want our system to be. This is our golden abyss. You can play your watered down versions of your console games here.
Yeah.
But is that particularly special now?
No,
I
but I
still,
also think it's interesting to see that that's not really where the system went in terms of its progression of its series. Is Super Mario 64 DS is still one of the, in my opinion, most technically impressive games on that system because it's a full 3D
yeah.
platformer. I can't name another 3D platformer on the DS that's not a Lego game. The Lego games were the only other ones that I know that really fell into that category. But other than that, they did start turning their franchises into more experimental touch based things that were just DS hardware, and not to say, hey, this is a console experience on your little two screen fucking flip-a-doo. But I think that's because the DS does shine more when its gimmicks are used for something creative and not just trying to jam a fucking console experience on there.
Yeah, it speaks to I think that the more interesting DS games did not come from Nintendo,
Sure.
because something like Scribblenauts is just so intrinsically tied to that hardware and was such a big moment at the time.
Mm,
But Nintendo's vision for the system lost.
sure.
It was what was built in its place that became the legacy of the machine. But I don't know. It feels like it doesn't have as strong of an identity outside of here. Let's go touch things, and it's actually our second and third party partners that are showing that to us.
Yeah, sure.
So from the perspective of primarily a Nintendo fan, Sure, I played Scribblenauts and loved it, but where was Nintendo really doubling down on that respect outside of your Brain Age and outside of things like that? Kirby Mass Attack, interesting utilization of the DS, but at a certain point, I feel like the libraries around it had better identities and had better crops of games because I'm sitting here while you're talking like, God, where were these franchises? What were they doing? Okay, Star Fox Command. Okay, we've got Wild World. I mean, Wild World is a gimped version of the Animal Crossing games around it. It's just
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know. I wonder how time will treat DS. I wonder how generations other than ours who have a weird nostalgia for it will treat DS. It's
Yeah,
very
I think that is really interesting because these games are kind of tough to replicate in other ways. The Wii U was able to have some of them on their virtual console, but I can't really see them showing up anywhere else because it's such an interesting form factor that can't really be redone in other places. I mean, I know it's possible, but it has to be worked around in such a way that it's obviously not as comfortable because it's not designed for that experience. So these games that shone so well on the DS, or even the ones that weren't necessarily taking advantage of the DS hardware explicitly, but were on the platform, like the new Super Mario Bros. Or the Pokemon series, which were essentially just the same versions you were used to, but you could touch the bottom screen in some instances. I don't know. I just think it's interesting to see these series that have, in my opinion, great iterations. The Pokemon series, and I think New Super Mario Bros. Sort of returning to the 2D Mario roots. That's a special game in my opinion. But and even things like that, I know you're gonna not fucking agree with me. But Pokemon Ranger is such an interesting take on the Pokemon formula. It created entirely new universe with entirely new mechanics, and it really worked well in that regard, in my opinion. But that series can't really be brought back unless it's completely reworked and loses that touch identity.
no, no, I think you're right, but I don't think that the DS did anything that the 3DS didn't do better
Sure.
with these franchises, and I think that's part of my problem because I love the 3DS so much. And the DS I really think is that bridge between the GBA and 3DS, not only because it came out in between, but because it was the proving ground for these ideas to become fleshed out a little bit more and
Mhm.
then translated to a device I think could realize them. Because the DS I think feels a little bit more gimmicky in comparison to the 3DS. And sure, the 3D
Sure.
is a gimmick, but Nintendo sells 3DSs without 3D because they realize that, but they
Yeah.
understand that those dual screens are integral.
Hmm.
And the dual screens are important and that does open up new organic gameplay possibilities, but I just don't think that was really the platform that showed why that matters as much as the 3DS did.
Yeah.
And perhaps it was a jump in power which enabled things, but I don't know. I've got a lot of sentimental attachment to the DS, but I'm not big on nostalgia for nostalgia's sake.
Hmm.
And so I've always not really felt clouded by that and have no real issue saying that okay, the DS happened and it was a system of hidden gems, I think.
Sure.
As you were mentioning, I think that's where it shines. Talk about your Elite Beat agents, your Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars, your Pokemon Rangers. I'll fucking shudder internally as I say that. Your Cooking Mamas, your Laytons. Phoenix Wright, by the way, is a GBA series, which is
Yeah,
very
but I do think that it hit its stride on the DS. There's a bunch of DS games weren't there.
sure, because yeah, because it got localized. Then Rhythm Heaven,
Yes.
the DS.
Electroplankton.
The DS was the system where these smaller games I think were able to thrive, but it didn't hit a balance that interests me, and I think it just became superseded by Nintendo's best handheld device.
Which I assume we'll get to eventually. I'm personally not aware of when the 3DS launched, but it's gonna be a
March
while, I think.
2011,
Okay, so it'll be
so
a couple months, but we'll get to it
4 months from
eventually.
now.
Yeah,
I forget
that'd be a
exactly what
fun way
day.
to talk about. But I think honestly, that
Yeah.
about does it for this discussion. The DS is certainly something that has importance to us, but might be kind of overlooked in the annals of gaming history because it just didn't hit home in many ways that people who care about video game history want to focus on. So yeah, I don't know. Nintendo was certainly in an interesting era here. It's our childhood era, but is it anyone else's? Who knows? Wait, that didn't make any sense. But
That actually didn't make any sense, but I
No.
think the note I want to leave it on is that the DS is incredibly important, and for its time, it was something very special. But we're not in 2004. This is a discussion of the DS 16 years later.
Yeah.
This isn't a discussion of the DS as Nintendo is selling one every time Mr. Miyamoto blinks,
Hmm.
you know, and it's important to contextualize that success and the innovations that it did have, like we touched on. But I don't know. Give me a GBA, give me a 3DS, and I'm a happy boy.
Yeah.
We'll be back, ladies and gentlemen. We're never gonna leave. Fucking
No.
more anniversaries to talk about, more games to review.
Can't get rid of us.
We'll be around.
See ya.
Unfortunately, goodbye.